Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be talking about the best defensive line in the Big Ten, in my opinion, with the University of Michigan's defensive line. But before we can actually talk about the defensive line, I need to sit down and talk about the scheme and explain some of the terms that I'm going to be using. So, what is Michigan's defense? If you forced me to describe it, I would describe it as a 3-4 multiple that majors in man coverage and blitzes quite a bit. Now, I'm not actually sure if Jesse Minter wants to blitz a whole lot. I know that Mike McDonald and the Ravens in the NFL, where this scheme sort of comes from, don't really like blitzing all that much. They would rather have 7 back in coverage and then the 4 linemen rushing the passer. But last year, Jesse Minter did blitz quite a lot, but that might be because of what the 2022 team's dirty little secret was, and that was that they couldn't rush the passer for jack shit. Basically, the only above average pass rusher that they had was Mike Morris, and he was just above average. He wasn't great or elite. If you look at the underlying numbers for last year's team, they had 7 sacks against Colorado State and 7 sacks against Indiana. It's okay. Those are teams that you're supposed to beat on. They're clearly inferior in terms of talent and coaching. The next best that they had was 3 against Maryland and 3 against Rutgers. And they got blanked against UConn and Illinois while also only having 1 sack against Ohio State and Iowa, both of which came in garbage time, basically. I'm not saying that the defensive line was bad last year. They weren't. They were excellent against the run, maybe the best in the Big Ten against the run. But the pass rush just wasn't there, and I believe it's going to be there this year. So when I refer to a 0/1 tech or a nose tackle, some people also say nose guard. I grew up with nose tackle, so I say nose tackle, but some people say nose guard as well. When I'm referring to that position, that is the player that lines up directly over the center or on either one of his shoulders. The main purpose of this player is to eat space and to not go backwards. Those are his 2 main jobs. You have to draw double teams in the passing game and the run game because of your sheer size, and I think Michigan has some excellent nose tackles this year. A 3 technique is referring to the player that lines up on the outside shoulder of the guard. So the right shoulder of the right guard or the left shoulder of the left guard. This player's main job is vertical penetration. So he needs to get up the field and blow up the play in the backfield or get at the passer. A 5 technique is referring to the lineman who is on the outside shoulder of the tackle. There's usually only 1 of these per scheme, although if it is sort of a 5 wide sort of scenario, you could have 2, but that doesn't matter as much. It's more about what this position's job is, and that is to usually be the weak side defensive end who's over the tackle, and his main job is to prevent cutbacks and or reverses and to keep the edge if something like that happens, force them back into the teeth of the defense so that the linebackers or safety coming downhill can clean it up. Now the edge or the SAM is that hybrid defensive end outside linebacker role that you see so many people in the NFL do. Micah Parsons, his rookie year, did that. This past year, he was really more of just a defensive end. Shaquille Barrett, if you want to go a little bit older, James Harrison was a good example of this sort of role. And when they're on the line, they usually line up in a 6, which is the outside shoulder of the tight end, because they're also the strong side player. And what I'm referring to when I say strong side or weak side is dictated by the run strength, which means if the center is the middle of the offensive line, then the side that has 3 players all huddled together right there is the run strength. Usually it's guard, tackle, tight end, but it could be guard, tackle, tackle, or whatever. Whichever side has more players to it is the run strength. And that is where the edge or the SAM is going to line up on any given play. Now, with that all settled, let's go ahead and jump right into who I believe will be starting at the nose tackle position, and that is Mason Graham. He played a lot last year as a true freshman. I believe he actually started the year as a starter. at the three technique because Mozzie Smith was the nose tackle, but I believe his more natural position going forward is going to be as the nose tackle. When you look at his positives as a player, he has big time pass rush upside, which is very rare for someone as big and as strong as he is. He uses his hands exceptionally well. I believe there were several times this past year, I remember at least two instances, where he pulled off a perfect push pull move and got to the quarterback. I think one of them was a sack, and then one of them, the quarterback managed to escape him because they were mobile and could do that. He's stout against the run, has great play strength, and I believe that he is going to thrive in an expanded role this season. He is only a true sophomore, but I think that he has big time, Mozzie Smith first round talent sort of upside, except for maybe even better because Mozzie Smith didn't really rush the passer, and I think that he has some serious potential in that regard. Now, as far as his negatives, he's not very quick, which is not really a concern all that much. If you are quick, that's fantastic. Mozzie Smith was quick as well last year at the nose tackle position, but when you're a nose tackle or a bigger three tech, being quick isn't really a necessity. It just would sort of put you over the top. Last year, as a true freshman, he was stout, but he wasn't dominant, which is why Mozzie Smith sort of ate into his snaps a bit towards the end of the year. And what his actual pass rush upside? Is this someone who is going to be able to get consistent pressure on the inside, even when rushing from a one technique or a zero technique? Or is he someone who is just going to be what I refer to as a pocket pusher, where he can kind of collapse the pocket in and force the quarterback to back up and run into the path of the edge rushers? Ultimately, this is a player that has first team All Big Ten and potentially even All American upside as a defensive tackle. I think his future is very bright for the Mason Blue. Now, the starting three technique is going to be Chris Jenkins in my mind. And when you look at him, what immediately jumps off the film is that he is a skilled pass rusher. He has 2 or 3 moves that he can win consistently with, as well as an effective inside counter move. He's solid against the run for a lighter 3 technique. I believe he's listed at 6'3 and 285, which is a little bit light for a 3 technique. You kind of want them to be right around 300. He's absolutely a leader in the locker room. He is probably going to be a captain this upcoming season. And the other thing that really, when you look at him, he uses his length well. He has long arms, especially for a defensive tackle, and he uses that length to keep guards and tackles away from him and to keep his jersey clean so that they can't get their hands on his chest, and it will allow him to use his athleticism to go and get the quarterback or tackle the running back or ball carrier. As far as his negatives go, he struggles against double teams, especially in the passing game. 2 people come to him and he just has no answers. In the run game, he does pretty consistently allow himself to be moved if he is getting double teamed as well. And this is more from a NFL scouting perspective, but what is his real position? Because he's kind of a tweener between an edge and an interior guy. Because of the arm length and the athleticism, you think he'd be able to play on the outside, but because of the lack of bend and not really great power either, maybe he has to be on the inside during passing downs. And because of that, since he's not a pure edge or a pure 3 tech, he might fall a little bit in the draft further than he should, in my opinion, because I think a 3-4 team is going to jump all over him, start him out at the 5 in base package, and then kick him inside on passing downs. I think in a bigger role as a pass rusher this year, he is greatly going to help this team's pressure rate statistics and just be a disruptive force in the middle. The player that I believe will be starting at the 5 technique, or that weak side defensive end position that Aiden Hutchinson played so well, is going to be Braden McGregor. I think he's a senior. He will likely get the start over another player like Derek Moore or somebody else. When you look at his positives as a player, he's big and athletic for the position. He's got some natural power in his hands, which causes him to play physically, which is good. He sets a good edge as well. He's quick off the ball and surprisingly bendy around the corner to get to the quarterback. He's always sort of had all of the potential to be a high end power 5 starting defensive end, and potentially like a day 2 or even first round sort of talent, but has never really been able to put it all together. And early indications be that he might have finally done that this past off season, because according to several outlets that have been covering Michigan spring ball and now summer camp, he has been lighting the world on fire, so to speak. Now, his negatives are going to be more about context rather than actual technical problems that he has. Last year, he played a lot and was a major part of the rotation early on in the year. And then, pretty much by the time Indiana came around, he wasn't really a part of it anymore, and then came back on towards the end of the year. So he sort of fell out of favor, because there was also hype about him coming out of the spring last year as well as this year. So you kind of have to take all of that spring ball and fall camp, summer camp sort of hype and take it with a grain of salt, because he didn't produce last year all that much. And the biggest reason is probably consistency. He shows a lot of pass rush moves, but none of them are really refined enough to be effective on a consistent basis. And that's really sort of him as a player to a T. He flashes in ability to be dominant, but can't always put it together consistently to be a starting caliber player and a legitimate NFL prospect. Now, I hope that he can put it all together, because I want him to succeed. I want Michigan to succeed, and for him to go on to the next level and have a long and successful NFL career. The edge, or what some people refer to as the Sam, is the next position we're going to be talking about. And I believe Jalen Harrell will continue to keep that spot on lock and be the starter. When you look at him as a player, the biggest thing that comes out is that he has the size, the speed, and the power. He can really do it all from an athletic standpoint. He excels on stunts, especially where it has him looping around back into the inside, because then he gets to show off that speed and that little swipe move that he does, which is probably his only move that he can go to consistently. He's fantastic in coverage against tight ends, I should say. And in the run game, tight ends, they just can't block him. He's just too strong, too long, too powerful for tight ends to block him consistently. And I think he has the frame to either maybe lose a little bit of weight and become an off-ball linebacker, tight end matchup guy at the next level, or to gain weight, to put on another 20-25 pounds and become a hand-in-the-dirt defensive end in a 4-3, or as a hybrid role in sort of a 3-4. The negatives for Jalen Harrell are all kind of nitpicks at this point, but the real one that is somewhat concerning is that he only has one pass rush move, really, and that was that swipe move that I talked about earlier. And his one-on-one pass rush suffers because of that, because if that doesn't work, he really doesn't have an answer, which is why he actually kind of stopped rushing the passer unless it was on a blitz or a stunt by the middle of the year. And this is a little bit of a nitpick, but his open field tackling can sometimes get him in trouble. Sometimes he leaves his feet too soon or can get juked or misled, and sometimes it's just sort of a low effort shoulder tackle that I don't really like. That's more of a nitpick. It's not really that big of a problem. It's more about the pass rush for him. But with the addition of other players this offseason, I think that is going to become less of a concern. And I think his role is really going to be as more of a true linebacker sort of player and a tight end matchup guy. Key depth. These three players on the screen here, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, and Rayshawn Benny, I believe are going to be the three players that are going to rotate in the most. Kenneth Grant to relieve Mason Graham as a nose tackle, Rayshawn Benny to relieve Chris Jenkins as the three technique, and Josiah Stewart to take Jalen Harrell off the field if we're looking for a more pass rush focused sort of situation. Josiah Stewart specifically, I think, is going to lead this team in sacks. I believe he has the potential to be a double-digit sack guy even in the Power 5. He was this past year at Coastal Carolina. I expect him to sort of fill out that David Ojabo role. A lot of people may not remember this, but Mike Morris was actually a starter in 2021 as well as 2022. In base package, he was the Sam or the edge on the strong side, and Aiden Hutchinson was the five technique on the weak side. And in more obvious pass rushing situations, Morris would actually come off the field and David Ojabo would come in to rush the passer. I believe Josiah Stewart is going to be tremendously effective in that role. Kenneth Grant generated a lot of buzz because he was the first pick in the spring game draft. He is very athletic for a big guy. I believe there could be a scenario where the base package doesn't actually look like what I'm predicting it to be. It could look like Kenneth Grant at the nose, Mason Graham at the three technique, and Chris Jenkins at the five, with Jalen Harrell as the edge slash Sam still. That could be a scenario, especially against a team like Penn State or Minnesota, who are really going to be run first teams to set up the pass. And Rayshawn Benny, I thought, played well in spurts this past year and has a lot of potential and upside as a penetrating three technique. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't actually talk about the five technique and who was going to be the backup slash rotation for Braden McGregor. And that's because I think Derek Moore might just surpass him and be a starter by the end of the year. Now, Derek Moore is going to be a very, very, very good player for the University of Michigan. I wanted to put him as the starter at the five technique so bad, but I just think at the beginning of the year, Jim Harbaugh is going to go with the senior rather than the young guy who might be better. He's just going to kind of let McGregor have his moment at the beginning of the year, and then when it actually sort of starts to matter, I think Derek Moore will take over as the starter and get the starter reps, because I don't think he's someone you have to take off the field at all. I think he's stout against the run. I think he has the potential to be absolutely dominant in the passing game as a pass rusher. And just to put my balls on the table here, I think he's a future top 10 pick in the NFL draft. I think he is going to be dominant and utterly fantastic. Maybe not this year. This year, I think he's just going to be really good. But his junior year, where he's going to be unquestionably the dude on the defensive line, I think he is going to dominate. And the last player that I just want to talk about is Eno Etta, who is a true freshman. And last year, even though I didn't make videos then, I did tell some of my friends to watch out for Derek Moore to potentially be a freshman to crack the rotation by the end of the year. And even though he didn't really, he still played really well when he was on the field. And that player this year, I think, could be Eno Etta. I think he is in line to start next year. No, Etta and Derek Moore, they're both likely to be the starters next year on the edge. Unless Josiah Stewart comes back. I believe he's a redshirt junior. He could come back for a redshirt senior year and even potentially a COVID year after that, I believe. But I think Josiah Stewart is going to be a day two draft pick, so I think he's gone. As well as Braden McGregor and Jalen Harrell, they're both going to be going to the NFL. I don't believe they have eligibility left. So your starters next year might be Derek Moore and Noah Etta. And I really like this kid. Really, when you watch high school film, it's not something I enjoy doing a whole lot. But when you do watch high school film, the only real things you can look at is the traits and the athleticism. And Eno Etta has that in spades. He's a very good athlete. He has excellent traits, and he could be someone who cracks the rotation by the end of the year. Now it's time to answer the question that I posed at the beginning of this video, or actually it was a statement. Now I'm going to talk about why I believe Michigan to be the best defensive line in the Big Ten. I would say that they're the best in the country, like I did with the offensive line video, but I don't know enough about the defensive lines of every team in the country in order to talk about that. And I don't feel like going out on a limb like I did with the offensive line video, because the fact of the matter is that this defensive line hasn't won the award for best defensive line in the country for 2 years in a row. But I do believe that they are the best defensive line in the Big Ten, at least. The main contenders that I have here on the screen: Ohio State, Penn State, and Illinois. Penn State might have the best pass rusher in the conference in Chop Robinson, but outside of that, they've got three redshirt seniors projected to start alongside Chop Robinson, who's going to be a first-round pick. And they're going to be crafty and wily, but ultimately I do think Michigan's defensive line is better and probably going to be more productive. Illinois, they got a couple of really good players in Keith Randolph Jr. and Jerzon Newton, who is very likely to be a first-round pick as well, but they don't have the depth that Michigan has. The main contender in terms of actually having the best defensive line and it not being Michigan is going to be Ohio State. And I do really like a lot of the Ohio State players in terms of scouting for the NFL, which is what I do. JT Tuimoloau is going to be a top 15 pick, probably. Jack Sawyer has all the talent in the world, could be a first-round pick as well. If he can stay healthy, Michael Hall Jr. is going to be a first-round pick as well, and they do have some depth to go along with it. Tyleik Williams is a very quality player to rotate and play up the middle, but they just don't have the depth that Michigan has. I think Michigan legitimately goes 8 deep on the defensive line. I think Ohio State probably goes 5 or 6. I think Penn State probably goes 5 or 6. I think Illinois probably goes 5 or 6. So that's really my main rationale for saying that they're the best in the Big Ten, is just the fantastic depth that this team has. And that is all that I have for you today. For those of you who stuck around, I just want to say thank you for watching the video. And if you're returning from my previous video, which got over 1,000 views, which is just absolutely absurd, thank you for the support. So go ahead and like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And if you disagreed with me at any point, or you just got something to say, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section below. But let's keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole, and I'll see you next time.